Good afternoon, everybody. This is Susan Gillis. I'm the curator of the Boca Raton Historical Society Museum. Welcome to our virtual lecture series, Boca History 101. Today we will be presenting a brief history of Boca Raton, Part 2. For those of you joining us for the first time, we welcome you. We ask that please do not unmute yourself. We've got everybody muted during the meeting. And please don't use your video because we're making a recording. For those of you who may have missed episode 1, you can view episode 1 and all our lectures by emailing research@bocahistory.org, and we'll provide you with a link. So let's get started. Getting ahead of myself, sorry. So in our last talk, we spent a lot of time from the Aboriginal pre-Columbian inhabitants of Boca Raton all the way up to the 1920s. And so today we begin again with the 1920s land boom, which was like the Klondike gold rush. It was absolutely wonderful to be a Florida property owner. And into Boca Raton's history comes this man, Addison Misner. And as I mentioned last time, Misner did not invent or create our little Boca Raton, which was a farming town for several decades, but he put her on the proverbial map. So Misner joins with brother Addison and a lot of wealthy backers to form the Misner Development Corporation, purchased property in Boca Raton for what they call the Boca Raton Project, arguably the most famous and sometimes infamous of the Florida land boom developments. And what is their goal? To create the greatest resort community in the world. And as I mentioned previously, contrary to some oft repeated stories, the Boca Raton Project was perfectly legitimate. They invested in all kinds of infrastructure, which is not something that a con artist would do, for instance. I've seen all the architectural plans. Misner had every intention of building the Boca Raton Project, but as you will see, time was not on his side. And you can find out more about this. We're going to have 2 lectures specifically on the Misner era and Boca Raton, but you can also check out our website. And there is a page on Addison Misner and the Misner era. So of all the buildings named Addison or Misner in Greater Boca Raton, this is the one that he actually had something to do with. That is the Addison event venue at Camino Real and Dixie. These were it's actually 2 buildings, north and south administration buildings, or ad buildings as the long-timers call it. And this is where the sales offices were, and the offices were the engineers and survey crew. Misner himself had an office in the south building on the 2nd floor. And it was the home of the town's only restaurant, which was apparently very popular. Misner designed 29 homes in what we now call Old Floresta, house model A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, house never built. And they still stand, and that's a historic district. And 22 homes in Spanish Village, which is a couple of blocks north of City Hall. 10 or 11 of those still exist. Camino Real was going to be the main drag. Many of you have heard the legend that you were going to be able to gondola from the train station to the hotel on this canal that was never built. Well, that's not quite accurate, and I'll go into this further in a future talk. But the fact is that the canal in Camino Real was meant to be in the western portions of the Boca Raton development. So it wasn't really going to be navigable. Instead, the eastern portion was going to be a broad boulevard. According to the promotion, broad enough to accommodate 22 lanes of traffic. I assume they mean Model Ts. And this is an actual photo of the administration buildings in about 1926. So we're looking west from just east, or just west of Federal Highway. Amazing, eh? So his masterpiece, Misner's masterpiece, was going to be a magnificent beachfront hotel called the Castillo del Rey. We've seen the plans for that. But the Ritz-Carlton group got involved and they said, hey, we love this Boca Raton project. We want to build this hotel, but we want to use our own architects. So Misner says, okay, but he needed a hostelry to house prospective investors in Boca Raton because at the time, there probably was not even a boarding house, much less an inn in town. So he quickly designs and has constructed the Cloister Inn, which opens as the Ritz-Carlton Cloister Inn officially in February of 26 on the western shores of Lake Boca Raton, where today the Boca Raton Resort and Club is. And at the lower left, you see the west facade or main entrance to the Cloister Inn, and to the right, the beautiful lakefront facade. Here's a couple of examples of projects that were never built. One is a train station for Boca Raton, but not the beautiful little passenger station we have today on the Florida East Coast Railway. This was for those other rail tracks. Back then it was the Seaboard Airline, nothing to do with aviation, just its name. Today that's part of Amtrak. So it's the Amtrak tracks west of today's 95 is where this train station was going to stand, never built. Castle Misner was going to be his home on a spoil island in Lake Boca Raton. It was absolutely over the top, as you can see, with the drawbridge and the whole business. Unfortunately, never constructed. And of course, it took 30 more years for polo to come to town. Now, Misner was not the only game in town in the boom. I have done a lot of research on this. It's very interesting. Number one, the beautiful house you see in the upper part of the picture, that's Morada Bonita, built in, I think, about 23 by Mr. Gates, one of our pioneers. Today, it's the home of Royal Palm Realty on East Palmetto Park Road, east of the bridge. The most successful competitor to Misner was Villa Rica. Villa Rica is a subdivision today on either side of Spanish River Boulevard. But back in those days, it went from Dixie all the way to the ocean. And it really was going to be a completely separate community. Well, in the midst of this wonderful nonsense, Boca Raton is incorporated in 1925. And Misner is actually hired as a city planner. Why not? He was planning the city anyway. And he is commissioned to build a town hall, or as they called it then, a city hall for Boca Raton. He actually designed two different versions of City Hall, a two-story building and a one-story version. Both proved too expensive by late 1926. So even though the foundations were laid and some of the walls were going up for Misner version 2, the city hired architect William Alsmeyer to complete the beautiful Spanish mission-style building that you see we still have today. And it opened for business by April of 27. So this is one of my favorite ads, and you can see where Boca Raton started to get this reputation. I am the rendezvous of the rich. Each passing day sees a new era in my existence. I am the dream of a genius, the materialization of a magical mirage. I am the Sunport of America. I am Boca Raton in 1927. Well, not as it happened, because the Florida land boom is going bust for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, in 1925, about the time Boca Raton project's getting started, the Florida East Coast Railway, which at the time was the only through railroad into Miami, into Southeast Florida, decided to embargo building supplies because there were boxcars laden with building supplies clogging up the sidings at every station in the entire east coast of Florida because there's not enough available labor to offload the building supplies because the available labor busy making money doing construction. We can't build without building supplies, and the railroad was a principal means of transport, and the roads were not that great, and so on. Number two, IRS gets very interested in some of these contracts, dealies going on. There's a smear campaign by Wall Street. And most of all, our winter visitors, wealthy winter visitors, come in January, February, March, and it's wonderful. But regular people come in July and August to a place that's totally seasonal. There's no place to stay. There's no place to eat. There's no air conditioning. There's no pest control. It's pretty awful. So they head north and say, you have got to be crazy to buy land in Florida. And then on top of that, we get not one, but two horrible, horrible Category 4 hurricanes. The 26th storm is really Miami and Fort Lauderdale's Hurricane Katrina. It did that level of damage to Dade and Broward County. It certainly damaged Boca Raton. And if that weren't bad enough, in 28, there's a horrible West Palm storm that comes ashore at West Palm Beach, pushes all the water out of Lake Okeechobee and drowns over 3,000 people. The larger picture shows little singing pines still standing after the 28th storm. So aside from the short range effects of these horrible storms, the long range effect was what really hurt us, because anyone who was planning to come to Southeast Florida did not. Anybody who could get out did. The Great Depression came years ahead of the rest of the nation. So 1927, no surprise, Misner Development Corporation is bankrupt. However, Misner's around, about less than 2 years. What is his legacy? Why are we so enamored of him? Well, a wonderful architecture that we still embrace in our community. He really was the first to have real city planning. A lot of the roadways he set up are still in play, we still use. And to me, very importantly, the city's reputation and self-esteem, which is very important in a community, I think, a wonderful thing. So one of Misner's original investors is Clarence Geist. He's a Philadelphia utilities guy. And he's also an avid golfer. So he purchases the assets of Misner Development for under $72,000, and it included miles of beachfront, which nobody wanted. But he needs a winter golf resort. So the Cloister Inn to him is the major asset. And what he does is he hires hotel architects Schultz and Weaver, who did the Breakers in Palm Beach, the Biltmore and Coral Gables, and the Waldorf Astoria in New York, to triple the size of the hotel, which opens officially in January of 30 as the Boca Raton Club. Now, the club, in addition to farming, becomes a major economic engine of the community for the next decade at the very least. And almost everyone in town either works part-time for the hotel or provides goods and services. Everyone is impacted by the club, this exclusive hotel, very exclusive hotel. The part of the picture that is encircled by the yellow oval, that quadrangle there, that is the Misner part of the hotel that he designed, the Cloister Inn. The whole thing collectively is the Boca Raton Club. And we'll talk more about that in a future lecture. Mr. Geist and his agents were, how can I say, very influential in municipal politics over the next decade, which turned out to be very good for local citizens. He wanted to provide the best for his hotel guests. So he loaned the money to the city to build what was in state-of-the-art water processing plant, where City Hall is today. It was a handsome little Mediterranean-style building. He also made sure that we got a passenger station for the Florida East Coast Railway, and of course that still stands north of Camino Real and Dixie Highway. Misner had nothing to do with either of these. He's already out of the picture. So with the exception of the club, Boca returns very much to her farming roots. But now green beans are the major crop. August Butts of Fort Lauderdale begins buying massive amounts of property in what is today West Boca in the 1930s. There were many other farmers as well. One of them, whose name you may recognize, is Clint Moore, was a vegetable farmer in what is today would be North Boca Raton near Del Rey. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is beautiful downtown Boca Raton in 1932. We're looking south from about northeast 2nd Street. You know where the Burger King is? Okay, that is Town Hall on the right. That's the north facade. And if you look closely, I see a bunch of nothing on the east side of the street. There are not one, but I want to point out 2 traffic signals. One at Boca Raton Road, which used to be a through street, and the other a block south at Palmetto Park Road. And they turned them off in the summertime to save money. So by 1940s, we haven't grown a whole lot. 700, maybe 750 residents in town. Again, here's 2 wonderful pictures of Federal Highway. At left, we're looking north from south of Palmetto Park Road. The arrow points to the cupola of Town Hall. And to the right, if you went outside Town Hall and looked south, that's the view you would see. And you can see the traffic signal at Palmetto Park Road. Well, a new era, World War II, made a terrific impact on Boca Raton, as you might imagine. And again, we'll be dedicating 3 lectures to this subject at the end of our lecture series. So more on that. Let's first talk about the impact on the hometown folks. Number 1, war begins, and in 42, Operation Drumbeat is in effect. And this is where German U-boats are attacking merchant shipping off the Atlantic coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. And so blackout conditions are enforced, and our local citizens are actually eyewitnesses to these attacks. They can see the smoke, they can hear the explosions, and flotsam from the wrecked ships would float ashore. For example, this coffee can full of Maxwell House coffee, still sealed, presumably still good to the last drop, would float ashore at places like what you see in the lower picture, which is approximately where the Beresford and Excelsior condominiums are today. In those days, it was the site of Boca Raton Villas. And this view at lower right is what you would see if you were a U-boat, taking a look at shore. The aircraft warning service was established. This was a civilian operation. There would be spotting towers in most communities. Ours was on the beach at what is today Red Reef Park, manned by civilians whose job was to record and report on every aircraft flying overhead. And in order to qualify, you had to memorize the silhouettes of both Axis and Allied aircraft. Well, there were military installations all over Florida, as you might imagine, particularly airfields established during the war because good flying weather, close to shipping lanes, and for practice purposes, and a lot of, back then, wide open, relatively inexpensive land. In Palm Beach County, we had a variety of military installations. We had Civil Air Patrol, back when it really, Civil Air Patrol, the beginning of Civil Air Patrol, very interesting. We had Coast Guard Auxiliary, we had the SPARs, who were the Coast Guard, the female auxiliary of the Coast Guard, hospitals, Morrison Field, which is today Palm Beach International Airport, very important field. It was the last U.S. soil that airmen would see if they were in the Air Force before they went overseas. So it was the last U.S. soil many soldiers saw. But by far the largest establishment was the Boca Raton Army Airfield. So who is stationed at the Boca Raton Army Airfield? It's the Army Air Force Technical Training Command. Their airborne radar training base. Radar stands for radio detecting and ranging, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our future lecture. It was not the only radar base in the country by any means. It was the Air Corps' only airborne radar training base during the war. And as a result, remember how small the town was. Thousands and thousands of men and women were stationed here and would come through for study and to be stationed at the base. The mascot of the base was this pelican, and you can see the radar is coming out of his head. So initially, the Air Corps leased the Boca Raton Club while they were actually building the base. It was by far the largest place in town, and so it became really the swankiest barracks, probably at least in this country, for a couple of years, although eventually the water pressure would make it up past the first floor, and there were trenches in the golf courses and so on. So the Boca Raton field was very large, 5,800 acres, and it spanned from Palmetto Park Road on the south to north of Yamato, and from the FEC tracks, so think Dixie Highway on the east, to the CSX tracks, think I-95 on the west, with a little bite out where Floresta and the art school are today, not on the base, and also where City Hall is today, because that was our water plant. And all of this property was acquired by eminent domain. The main entrance was on about where Northwest 4th Ave is at Palmetto Park Road. And you can see at my wonderful map on the right, I have outlined what is today FAU and the airport, and you can see that corresponds to what were the runways of the base. So most of the buildings were actually east and south of what is today FAU. This property was acquired by eminent domain, and what that means is the government wants your land. Here's some money, get out. Everyone was compensated. Were they happy about what they got? Not necessarily. I want to talk a little bit about that because it's kind of interesting. I believe that the War Department didn't even know who they were acquiring property from. We have a document called the Order of Takings, which is a list of all the parcels acquired for the base. And there's, on the original document, there's no names. Someone has come back in and penned in the names of the property owners. And I believe the city did that. And here is a list that, again, the city created that corresponds to a map of what they call the vendors to the War Department. Now, this is going to make sense in a minute. The largest vendor, the largest entity is actually the Lake Worth Drainage District. They gave the most property that became part of the airfield. There were about 50 families displaced, Black, white, and Japanese, by the air base. Eula Purdom Rollison recalled that her father, Mr. Purdom, he had a house kind of near City Hall, west of the tracks on Palmetto Park Road. And he was not at all happy at what he was compensated, but there wasn't a lot of recourse that you had. So this does signal the end of the Yamato colony, and we'll talk more about this, a lot more about this during the World War II discussion. Most of the settlers of Yamato had left by the 20s. They sold their property in the boom and returned to Japan, went to New York, various places. By 42, there are 13 people that we know of still at Yamato. And they are pretty much displaced by the base. The Kobayashis moved to Fort Lauderdale, go in the landscaping business. The Kamiyas moved to Delray Beach. Mr. Murakami, he didn't actually own land at the airfield. He owned a lot of land, but not that became part of the airfield, but he lived at Yamato. He moves to Delray. And Mr. Kamikama, his house was on the east side of Dixie Highway, which was not on the base. So he didn't have to move. The Floridians, very importantly, our Floridians were not interned. That is not all there is to the story, as we will see, but blessedly, they were not interned. So back to BRAF. Why were we here? To learn radar. So you've got navigators, flight crews, mechanics, people working on all the vast variety of antenna. I did a little reading on that, and I cannot tell a lie, I cannot explain it to you. But the technology was so rapidly changing during the war, as you can imagine, just to keep up was just amazing. All the instructors, all the administrators. Well, very long story, very short. The war ends in 1945, but the base still continues in operation until 1947. At the time, the now Air Force had already decided to move out of town, but a horrible hurricane, another Cat 4 storm, hit Fort Lauderdale in September 47 and destroyed most of the buildings of the base. Most of the buildings, there were concrete block buildings, but most of them were actually tar paper shacks, and they came down like dominoes. And apparently everybody in town who had a camera went and took the same pictures because we have them in our collection. So the base is really destroyed. And this just hurries the move by the Air Force to of most personnel and most operations to Keesler Field, which is in Biloxi. However, the city is going to be able to acquire a lot of this former air base land back from the government, and you will see that will be the next part of our story. So we thank you for joining us and look forward to talking with you in part 3 of A Brief History on next Thursday.